Wales, one of the 4 home nations underneath the umbrella of the United Kingdom. It's home to breathtaking landscapes, a substantial sheep population, belting baritones, and a history of world-class rugby. It's also run by the political party with the longest winning streak of any in the world. Welsh Labour's electoral success began in the 1922 general election when it won half of the Welsh seats, and the party is still the biggest Welsh party in Westminster a century later. It's also won all 6 Welsh elections since the nation established its own government. But could all that be about to change? A year after Labour's landslide victory in the 2024 general election, the recent local elections in England showed a big shift in public opinion towards more right-wing parties like Reform UK. And with Wales's own upcoming elections in 2026, are we about to see the UK's existing political cracks get even deeper? This week on Westminster Watch, we've come to the Welsh capital of Cardiff to find out whether the politics here could signpost what's to come across Britain. But first, let's explain exactly where we are. I'm outside the Senedd, which is Wales's parliament. Usually, of course, we're at the UK's central government in Westminster, but there are devolved parliaments in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, where these nations can legislate for themselves in areas such as healthcare. The relationship between these devolved governments and Westminster can indeed be fraught. The current First Minister, Senedd Morgan, recently gave a speech where she took a pretty firm stance.
Where we disagree, we will say it. Where we see unfairness, we'll stand up for it. When Westminster makes decisions that we think will harm Welsh communities, we will not stay silent. This is not a split, this is grown-up, modern government.
Let's get inside the Senedd and speak to some members who can spell it all out for us in more detail. I spoke to Welsh Labour politician Helen David. Helen, welcome to Westminster Watch and thanks for joining us here in the Welsh Parliament. So here we are in the home and product of devolution. Is devolution working for Wales?
Well, welcome to Westminster Watch to Wales. You're very welcome to be here. One of the things that devolution does is it brings decision-making closest to the people. So, for example, we all remember COVID. During COVID, those decisions were being made. I was able to go on Facebook Live, having a briefing in the morning from the First Minister and inform people about the decisions that were being taken during the day and how it was going to affect people in the week ahead. So that kind of local decision-making was so clear then, and the Welsh Labour government was responsible for it. And also other things like we've got free prescriptions in Wales, for example, we get free school meals, breakfast clubs. All of those kinds of decisions have been taken specifically for the people of Wales, separately to what happens in England.
At the moment, of course, there is a Labour government in Westminster and there is a Labour government here in Wales. Under devolution,
does that actually create advantage or tension?
Well, it's a mixture of the two. The principle is partnership in power, so that the First Minister meets with the Prime Minister and says, this is what we need for Wales. But also, we used to talk about clear red water between Welsh Labour and UK Labour. Now we talk about clear red lines. This is what we want for Wales. This is what we want to achieve. For example, there's devolution of Crown Estate funding we'd like to see. We've had 1.6 billion extra in our budget this year that we'd never had under 14 years of Conservative government. So there's the good things like that, but also where we need to challenge. And that's just part of the nature of devolution of two parties governing in partnership.
But are you ever brought into line? Do Westminster come in with a heavy stick and say, you are part of the Labour Party, fall into line?
No, not at all. I was in Westminster for the spring statement. So I met with our local MPs, Nick Smith, Chris Evans, Ruth Jones. I met with them to talk about the impact of the spring statement. And together, Chris Evans and I are crafting a response to the benefits reforms the UK government is developing. So, that's where the partnership comes in at a local level. Devolution allows me to share that voice with our MPs in Westminster.
Let's turn to the politics a little bit more now. It's in a year's time. There are going to be very important elections to this Parliament.
And given polling, with Plaid Cymru on 30%, with Reform on 25% and the Labour Party struggling on 18%, are we looking for the first time in decades at Labour not leading the government here in Wales?
There's other polls are available that shows figures are slightly different, but it's undoubtedly going to be a close election. The system is designed for coalition governments now, so it's very likely you'll see a coalition government of some kind. My worry is Reform will become Nigel Farage experimenting with Trump's playground in Wales. That's a real danger. Plaid Cymru could come in and decide to close our borders with England if they decide to join the European Union and England doesn't, which would create the Northern Ireland problem all over again. I think we've got to have grown-up politics, though, and say we are going into an election that is likely to lead to some form of coalition government, but it needs to be a government that is led by Welsh Labour because of that experience, that memory, and everything we've done that I've already mentioned that's good for the people of Wales.
There are some big changes coming for that election too. Wales and Scotland will both be pioneers of a new, more proportional voting system, and of course 16-year-olds will be able to vote in these elections. Here in Wales, there will also be 36 new members, bringing the total number of politicians to 96. This means, until now, fringe parties like Reform UK and Plaid Cymru might hold more political leverage than ever before. Despite not winning a seat in last year's general election, Reform UK came second in 13 constituencies across Wales, finishing with 16.9% of the vote in Wales. And Plaid Cymru recorded its highest ever vote share at a general election of 14.8%. So, what might these changes mean for Welsh politics, and what can that tell us about the rest of the United Kingdom? To help answer these questions, I met up with political journalist Will Haywood, who is a columnist at The Guardian. Will, Labour have been in power for decades. I think they've been the longest governing party of any democracy. What's been their secret?
I think the secret to the success is probably because they've managed to put the Welsh within Welsh Labour. So the contrast between Welsh Labour and Scottish Labour has always been that Welsh Labour have been able to position themselves as very pro-Wales. And they've had deep roots, especially with Wales's industrial heritage, like for instance mining, heavy industry. They've been able to have really deep roots there, which have been there ever since 1922. Those, as we see with lots of established things in politics now, those things are starting to erode. Things are becoming a bit more divided. There's more plurality in politics. And I think that is what the biggest risk is now, because I've never known Welsh Labour and UK Labour as close as they are now. And when you have an unpopular UK Labour government, that can then reflect on Labour in Wales.
We've also got coming up some huge changes to the way people will vote in these elections next year. What do you think is the most striking of those?
So the new electoral system, I think there's a few differences, but I think two of the main ones are, firstly, that it will be a list system. So although there'll be a list of candidates, you are ticking a box for the party rather than the candidate. And for a party like Labour, which has had huge recognition of their members compared to some of the other parties, that's actually quite damaging, because all it's going to say is Welsh Labour, and it's going to say Reform next to it, then Plaid Cymru and the Conservatives. So I think that will be a big difference. I think one of the other changes is this is a very, very, very proportional system. So in the UK, we are so geared up to tactical voting, like who is the main people here, who do I want to get out, whereas here you tick a box for the party, where you put a cross in the box for the party you think you would like most to win.
And of course, one of the key ones is that for the first time, people will be able to vote from the age of 16. Who's going to really benefit from that politically?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I was actually looking at some data yesterday, and young people either seem to be splitting for Plaid Cymru. Young people do skew Welsh in terms of identity compared to Welsh, British, just British, or for Reform. So actually, it's those two parties, the one more on the left and the one more on the right of Welsh politics, who are likely to benefit from over 16s voting. Obviously, that is if they turn out.
So a recent poll put, as they described themselves, Plaid Cymru, the National Party of Wales, right at the top at 30%, Reform on 25%, coming from nowhere, and then Labour way down on 18%. Are we about to see a change in power for the first time in this Parliament?
Yes, I think that is the most likely result. although there's lots of different ways you could split the Senedd if it was to turn out like that, because of the red lines that lots of parties have put down, there is really two scenarios which are most likely. So because every party other than the Conservatives have said they would not do a deal with Reform, and every party other than Reform have said they wouldn't do a deal with the Conservatives, the only way you end up with a Conservatives or the Reform in power is together. And I don't necessarily see a scenario where more than 50% of people in Wales vote for Reform or the Conservatives, especially because most of the Reform vote is coming from the Tories. But what I think we'd most likely see, based on that polling, is you have a Plaid Cymru First Minister, which, as we saw with the SNP back in the late noughties, can be a huge seismic change for the dialogue within a devolved nation. And then with some kind of coalition or cooperation agreement with the Welsh Labour and potentially a Green and some Liberal Democrats.
Do you think what we're about to witness here over the next year and the run-up to these elections and the changes that we're going to be going through, is that a foretaste of what we're going to see in the run-up to the UK general election?
Yeah, kind of fitting because it's Wales. It is really the canary in the mine for the UK. What we've got here is an incumbent and, frankly, fairly unpopular Labour government, which some people believe have failed to deliver on the promises of change that they made. In 3 years' time, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a very similar situation in the UK Parliament.
Will painted a pretty bleak picture of Welsh Labour's future, but can they turn it around in time for the 2026 elections? We sent our reporter Ellen Morgan to see what the voters think.
What do you think of Welsh Labour? Do you think they've made a positive change to Wales or no?
Not really, no, not at the moment.
Why is that?
I think they're struggling from Westminster. I think they've been controlled from there, I think.
We were promised a lot, we haven't been delivered a lot, and I don't think they're there for the general people.
Do you think Welsh Labour have made a positive change to Wales?
Not in the health service, no.
It's like living through your worst nightmare.
Really?
Yeah.
Who do you think could make things better?
A Reform UK.
Why is that?
They're the only people who can get things done. They'll control immigration. They ought to give priority to local people first of all. Nobody should get council housing unless they've qualified by a long residence period.
I don't think I will be voting for anybody. I don't think any of them offer a proper solution.
I think all politicians, they stink. They're all crooks, as far as I'm concerned.
Plaid Cymru, yes. Nothing wrong with Plaid Cymru.
I will vote for Labour Party because they stood for us when we needed them. The things happened, against Muslims and everything. They have been quite strong backup for us, racism and all. So we'll definitely won't leave them alone when it's time for vote.
One man who wants these votes is John Clark, a chair of a Reform UK branch in the north of Wales. John, in next year's parliamentary elections for the Senedd, we're going to see a new system, proportional representation used to elect new assembly members. Is this something that is going to give Reform that advantage, allowing them to break through and make a major impact on these elections?
I think they will. I think those changes, the short answer is they will help Reform. But the irony is that those changes were proposed in 2022 when Reform were at 4% in the polls. And at the time, Labour and Plaid were probably anticipating those extra Senedd members would be occupied by their activists. If you like, they were perhaps trying to increase their client's state. But the irony is that they've probably created extra spaces for people who will hold them to account. I think it's worth also saying that Reform wouldn't have supported the expansion of the Senedd if we were in the Senedd at the time, for the simple reason that it's going to cost the Welsh taxpayers an extra 12 million a year. So although we wouldn't have supported it, we will take advantage of it.
So John, to win those votes, you need to have policies. What are the key policies that you will be putting forward as Reform?
Well, the key platform is 4 essential points. We'll get Wales doing business again. So we'll reward hard work. What we'll do is we'll raise lower income earners out of taxation. So if you're earning less than £20,000 a year, you won't pay any income tax. If you're a small business in Wales with less than £100,000 profit, you won't pay any corporation tax. So that's just a beginning to get the economy moving. Wales, I don't know whether you're aware, but Wales has a £14 billion deficit every year. And the reason is there's no business in Wales anymore. We've seemed to have weeded it out. We have to make Wales a fertile environment for business. Also, we will limit immigration, which will relieve pressure on frontline services.
You mentioned immigration. Now, we've been talking to people out here on the streets, and there is some support for you indeed, and there are some who are less enthusiastic. But immigration did come up, but so did other things. Are the priorities here in Wales different to the priorities of those in England?
It's round the corner, immigration, and we have a situation where the NHS isn't coping in Britain. Housing is at a shortage.
And the NHS is run here in Wales by the Welsh Assembly and the government, which is Labour.
Yeah, and we've got 21 weeks waiting time in Wales. We've only got 14 weeks waiting time in England. So there's every reason for Wales to be looking for an alternative.
But why do you think you and your colleagues in Reform can make a difference in healthcare in Wales?
It's not an easy one to fix, which is why no government has fixed it. So we're going to do some quite radical things. If the NHS isn't capable of treating somebody within a reasonable period of time, we will allow, free at point of use, people to go and get their healthcare from private providers. So one way or the other, we will get people off of the waiting list, and that's what's important to people who are sick, worried, and waiting for treatment.
Polling in England for Reform has been vindicated by the recent local elections. Here, a similar story, but in a recent poll, Plaid Cymru, I've got 30% share of voting intention at the moment. You're on 25, and Labour are way down on 18. Why has Labour crashed after years of dominance in Welsh politics?
Well, Labour have been in power for 26 years in Wales. Welsh public services are failing and our infrastructure is crumbling. You only have to look around any Welsh town to see the bus shelters falling to pieces, the walls crumbling. Wales is desperate for better governance. And the real question is, how have Labour lasted so long? And the answer to that is because the Welsh Conservatives have been so appalling that there's been no alternative.
Do you think what we're going to see in the Welsh elections next year is a bit of a trendsetter for what we might see in the UK? Not least the fact that here in Wales, 16-year-olds will have the vote.
Well, I think they might get surprised because a lot of 16-year-olds actually are expressing support for reform. So they may get a result that they're not expecting from allowing the extension of the vote. I do think that if we do well in Wales, it will help in the subsequent elections in England. So, for example, a good Senedd result will help in 2029 when we're doing a general election. And the fundamental reason for that is the public will get to know us and they will learn to trust us because it's about what we do when we're in government. At the moment, it's all just proposition. But once we're in government, we can actually deliver for the public, we can gain trust, and that's what's important, and that's what the Welsh people need.
Another party that could stand to benefit from the voting reforms is Plaid Cymru, the self-styled National Party of Wales. I spoke with their member of the Senedd, Helen Hel. Helen, welcome to Westminster Watch. Here we are at the heart of a devolved administration in Wales. It's been 2 decades. Has devolution worked for Wales?
Working for Wales, yes, very glad that we have it. Could it be better? Yes, because we still need more powers here. We're always frustrated because we keep hearing in this chamber, if we had more powers, if we had more control over this.
What sort of things?
Well, when it comes to devolution of broadcasting, because broadcasting is obviously really important in terms of democracy, engaging people, in terms of policing, those kind of issues that are really important. Obviously, I represent Plaid Cymru. We'd like to see independence for Wales and all decisions about Wales made here in Wales. But even things like the Crown Estates, devolution of the Crown Estate to Scotland denied to Wales, so we don't even have control over our natural resources.
There's commonality here. We've been talking to Welsh Labour, and they said exactly the same thing about that.
Is that something that you think runs right across the Parliament, a demand for more powers to govern for the people of Wales?
On certain issues, yes, definitely. So we all agree, for instance, that we should be able to decide that St David's Day should be a bank holiday here in Wales. That's cross-party but denied by UK government. On the Crown Estate, some differentiation, but Welsh Labour here agree with us, but their Labour MPs that represent Wales vote against that in Westminster. So there's not unity within Labour here in Wales.
With both the governing party in Westminster and the governing party here in Wales being exactly the same, doesn't that pose the prospect of more effective government because they are, if you like, on the same side? Or does it create a tension and perhaps even a subservience to the power held in Westminster by the Labour Party?
Well, it seems to be the subserviency is something that we've seen since Keir Starmer has come into the power, because we heard for years from Labour here in the Senedd, once we have a UK Labour government, it'll be so different for Wales, we'll have this partnership in power. Yet we see the First Minister here in Wales, the leader of Labour here in Wales, failing to get traction on some of the key issues from a UK Labour Prime Minister. So I think it's really unhelpful when you hear Labour say one thing here in Wales, but say something completely different in Westminster, because obviously the First Minister helped Labour campaign for that win in the last general election, but yet they're failing to deliver the things you'd like to see them delivering.
Next year's elections to this Parliament are going to be fought under new rules. Those rules will introduce proportional representation, and votes for 16-year-olds, of course, will continue. Is that going to be to your advantage or your disadvantage?
It's a huge opportunity. The polls at the moment were released this week showed Plaid Cymru leading with 30%, Labour support dropping to 18%. So there is a huge opportunity, but also it's about how we use that additional number of members to better scrutinise government, but also to develop legislation here in Wales, because it has been difficult with so few members of the Senedd to do that scrutiny as effectively as you'd want to be.
But what about when it comes to governing? Because it's going to be very hard for one single party to get over 50% of the vote and govern in their own name. You're looking at coalition, aren't you? And are you ready for that?
Well, we've had a number of coalitions here in the Senedd.
Always led by Labour, though.
Always led by Labour, and I think that's what's going to be the biggest difference, because the first past the post system does mean that you do, well, more likely to get a system where parties who are, like Labour, Conservatives, are able to win those first past the post. We've always had a degree of proportionality. 20 of our current 60 cohorts are elected by proportional representation, which has meant then that there hasn't been that outright majority. We've had for this Senedd term a cooperation agreement for 3 years between Plaid Cymru and the Labour government. Currently, the sole Liberal Democrats are supporting Welsh Labour to pass their budget. So it's quite normal for us here in Wales to have parties collaborate. And I think people of Wales do respond quite positively to that.
Well, would the people respond positively if you went into coalition with Reform?
Well, we won't be going into coalition with Reform. We are at totally opposite ends of the political spectrum. And in terms of what we are looking at now is going to the people of Wales in terms of the positive programme of government. Because the issue we have in Wales is we've had Labour dominate Welsh politics for over 100 years. Since the Senedd has been established for 26 years, they've led every single government. They're tired, they're out of ideas. It's about time that we have that change of government.
There we have it, Wales, a country within a country, responsible for its own governance and people, but still a part of the United Kingdom's shared identity. And this small slice of the kingdom holds power not only within its own borders. The UK's political future may well be written in the ballot boxes of Wales. That's it for this special edition of Westminster Watch. A big thank you to all my guests for joining me, and don't forget to connect with us on Twitter at Westminster TRT. But for now, from me and all the team here in Cardiff, goodbye and thank you for watching.